Right. Hello. I'm having some network issues. Please let me know if I sound like a robot. Um, and also if it actually looks okay, or it's just me. I'm not entirely sure. Okay. All right. Once I can get confirmation if you guys can hear me and if the stream looks okay, then I will. But you can't hear me. Oh, that's not good. Uh-oh. Well, my mic seems to. Oh, now you can. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, my OBS is like red. I'm getting red and yellow. Okay. All right. Hopefully the stream looks fine. Maybe it's just me. I have no idea, but it's yeah, today I guess my internet's not cooperating. Okay. That's fine. All right. Let's see. Where did we leave off? I had skipped all that. Reverse. We did the hoisting. We did. I went over the object-oriented stuff that you can do with JavaScript. And all right, so let's talk about some abstraction. All right. So I believe we ended up here. Okay. I believe this is the last thing we talked about. Okay. That was just the inheritance stuff. So now we're going to talk a little bit about abstractions and how we can, use the concept of abstraction to make our functions reusable across different objects as long as they share the same base class. Okay, so this gives us some pretty cool uh, abilities here. All right. So here we have a simple class called vehicle. And, we're not really defining steer, decelerate, and accelerate, right? Because a vehicle can be anything, right? Because, you know, whenever we think about abstract types, you have to ask yourself, okay, the thing that I'm trying to think about, can I actually visualize it? If I say, imagine a vehicle, can you actually visualize that? You can probably visualize types of vehicles, but you could never actually show me a vehicle because the idea of a vehicle is abstract, right? For example, a bicycle can be a vehicle, technically. A motorcycle is a vehicle. A car, an automobile, is a vehicle. A truck is a vehicle. A bus is a vehicle. A boat is. You see what I mean? These are all types of vehicles, but and they all satisfy this probably definition of being a vehicle, but they're like you can never show me an actual just a vehicle, right? There's no such thing. It's an idea. It's this abstractness. Okay, so because of that, we can define some behaviors. Okay, it's possible. But a lot of the times we leave the specificities, the specifics of these behaviors, like how they actually act, right? When they actually start doing taking action, doing their behaviors. We leave those implementations to concrete classes, okay? Things that are more specific. So for example, when I say a vehicle, let's say I define a vehicle to be something that can steer, decelerate, and accelerate, okay? Let's say those are some behaviors, okay, for example, okay? And we have a property here, we'll call it max speed, the maximum speed this particular vehicle can go, let's just say. Well, when we talk about steering, like how you actually do the steering, the deceleration and the acceleration is going to be dependent on the type of vehicle. For example, if you're on a skateboard, how do you steer? Well, you shift your weight from side to side, and that's how you steer. On a bicycle, how do you steer? Well, depending on how fast you're going, you can either shift your weight or you turn the wheel, right? You turn the handlebars, and that turns the front wheel, and then you turn. Okay. A car, you have a steering wheel. See, so all these vehicles, right? They can all steer, but they steer differently, right? The way they steer is going to be different on every specific type of vehicle. Deceleration, if you're on a skateboard, you can decelerate by falling off. That's way to decelerate quite rapidly. But, you're supposed to decelerate by, putting your, what's it called? Not the truck, but the lip of the skateboard. You pull it back and you use friction to decelerate you. On a car, you push the brakes, etc. Okay, so again, these implementation specificness happens on every specific class, okay, that derive from the abstract class, okay? So here I just put a note that, no implementation has been added. This is because vehicle acts more like a blueprint of what a vehicle is. And so this class expects that it will be derived / inherited from, hence why there's no implementation details. Now, in languages like Java, you usually have a specific attribute that you would associate with a class called abstract. So you would say something like public abstract class. In C#, you would do the same thing. In C++, there is no abstract keyword. The way you specify an abstract is you set you would set the methods equal to 0. That would make it abstract. Okay. So an argument could be made that car is also kind of abstract, right? It's like, well, what kind of car? Well, there's a Honda, there's a Toyota. Even those are kind of abstract. But you say, oh, Honda Civic, a specific year. Yeah, we can go down that route as well. But for the sake of, having an example here I have a class that extends vehicle, right? So you can say, okay, all cars are also types of vehicles, right? That's true. That makes sense as far as this classification is concerned. And then you'll notice here that steering, deceleration, acceleration, I have added, particular implementation details. In this case, I'm just, logging the car steers, the car decelerates, etc. Okay. And every time you inherit from a class, you must always accept your base class's constructor attributes. And if you want to add extra ones, you totally can. But you must always accept at least your base class's constructor parameters. Okay. So car has a max speed, but car isn't the one that is actually defining max speed. That's actually coming from vehicle. We are just, we are required that we have the max speed in the constructor because vehicle requires it. And that's what we call super. So remember, every time you see the word super, we always refer to the parent that we are inheriting from immediately. So it goes one step up. Okay? So super is calling the constructor here. So in this syntax, super followed by immediate parentheses and the attribute is calling the base class's constructor, which would be vehicle's constructor, which looks like this. just saying, okay. Now in Java, you would normally, you would define your variables here, but classes are just objects, and we can just say this dot, and we can create our properties on the fly. So we don't actually have to define them. Okay. So again, this is JavaScript, not Java, so it's slightly different. All right. I had to check my router again because it keeps cutting in and out. Okay. All right, cool. So hopefully you guys can hear me. Please let me know if you guys can still hear me. Because I just see red on my OBS. It's yelling at me. I'm not entirely sure what's going on. Okay, so um, so here we have this we have this vehicle V. Okay, now we can't really stop creating abstract classes. Like I can just create a vehicle. There's nothing really for me to actually be able to stop this from happening. In other languages like Java and C++, or like C Sharp, if you say something is abstract, you can't actually create an instance of that thing. It's not possible. JavaScript doesn't have a way to like stop it. I think there's like some changes. Um, you're mainly saying, yeah, I'm sorry about that. The buffering. Yeah, like I said, I'm not entirely sure. Usually it's pretty green, very green. Now it's like today's just terrible. It's just red. As far as uploading, I'm not entirely sure what's going on. Um, okay, but we'll try to push through here. So here I'm just defining a vehicle, goes 10, max speed of 10, and then a car, max speed of 20. I just say v.accelerate and then c.accelerate, right? Okay. Now, this idea of polymorphism. So polymorphism is just the idea that an object can take on many forms. So, a vehicle can be many things, right? I gave you a huge list of different types of vehicles, right? So this idea of polymorphism starts to come into play. So I have this object here in my constructor. So I have this class now called driver, like an actual driver. You give the driver a name like Billy Bob or, Jane Smith, whatever. So there's just a name, okay? And then, but the driver drives, ideally, a specific type of vehicle, a vehicle. Now, this vehicle can technically be any kind of vehicle, right? As long as, right, when we say driver operate this specific vehicle, it has these behaviors, right? So right now, if we think about a driver operating on some vehicle, we have no idea what it's going to be, right? It can be a skateboard, it can be a bike, motorcycle, a car, a truck. We really have no idea what's going on here, right? And so this is the power of polymorphism, is that this vehicle object can take on any form, right? We just hope that these behaviors obviously work. That'd be ideal. But yeah, we have no idea what it's going to be. So it's pretty cool how we can operate like this, right? So here, again, the driver doesn't know what type of vehicle, he will operate. As long as the vehicle can accelerate, steer, and decelerate, the driver is fine with that, right? So that's what we're going to be having there. And the fact that we made vehicle abstract gives us an interface to work with. So our driver can now work with any subtype of vehicle. This process is called polymorphism, and the method operate is polymorphic. So this operate is polymorphic in essence. Okay, and that was just about it. That's all I wanted to hit. Now, and then here are the solutions. Now, we will be using classes. We will be using polymorphism when we start talking about building a social media application. But there's also other types of ways that we can build objects, specifically in JavaScript. And that's something called a factory pattern. So we're going to revisit object building later, and we're going to talk about a factory pattern when we start building our social media application. So one thing that we had was we had this assignment, right? This assignment. Did everybody get a chance to finish this? I hope it wasn't too difficult or confusing. Some people already asked some questions, but I'm just curious as to whether or not people were able to finish this assignment, or if anybody had any questions. Herman says was not able to complete it yet. Does anybody have any questions? Should we wait until Wednesday to do this then? For me to go over the solution? Or should I just go over it now and then you finish it on your own time before we start the HTML stuff? Or if anybody has any questions about any on any of the assignments that were in the slide. So I have Jimbo here on the Discord, says that he finished it. Okay, so yeah, so let's try his solution here. Or here we go. So, or I'll just paste it all right here. So we go. So we have JSON, and then then we have this new JSON, okay, and he's using JSON.parse. So Emmanuel's asking, should first name and last name be in some sort of order in the object? Now they can be in any order, doesn't matter. Alex says didn't finish. Okay, so yeah, let's look at Jimbo's solution here, and let's check it out. Okay, so we have var, right? Okay, so he's using var. That's fine. Though I would probably say that now that we know about ES6 and the differences between let and const, I think moving forward we should probably stay away from var as much as possible. Let's just start using let. But var is fine here. So the new JSON.parse. Now, I'm assuming they were able to figure out the parse part because again, I had given some hints to some of the APIs in JavaScript, and something for you to read, some hints and stuff. So the parse, what this does is it actually takes in a string, and then this parser will then construct a JavaScript object. And the JavaScript object is what we know, something like this, right? Key, and then some value, etc., etc. So it's gonna take this and then create this. Okay, so that's what it's going to do. So that's what this new JSON is. This is basically an object now. Great. So you should be able to tell, one, I told you the shape right here, API JSON shape, okay? I didn't explicitly tell you, but based off the slides and what we've been going over, you should have immediately have seen these square brackets and this comma and been like, oh, this is a array, okay? So Jimbo saw that it's an array. So we're gonna go let I equal to 0. And again, they're using the for loop that we went over. And then there was this function here that you just had to fill out. I just called it convert. Okay, so now we have this new JSON here, and we're feeding it the so we're feeding it a specific element, because remember, we have this array. Each element is a JSON object, okay? But the problem is that it's malformed, right? For example, name is, like this, where we wanted to actually split it apart as fname, lname as strings. Age happens to be a string as well because it fed us through the internet, right? It just happened to be a string. We want to make sure that we convert that to a number, so when we put it in our database, we know that we have a number and not a string. Okay, so here we go. So full name, so data.name, again using the dot operator. And there's this method called split. And so this was actually here. This is one of the APIs that I even put here. So you can go here and you can actually read about split, how this works. So we're splitting the name. And in the name, when you split it, actually creates an array. We're assuming that when we split this name, that we're going to have a space there, so we can actually have an array of at least 2 elements. So 0 and 1. So the first one would be the first name, and the second one would be the last name. So there we go. We have that, and then we have data.age, and notice that they're converting from age. We're gonna force it to become a number. So if it's a string, we're for sure getting a number. So this is how you would convert. And again, I put the hint here for string to number right here, so you can actually read the API there. And there you go, number data.age. So if this was a number, we're fine. It's just going to be a number. But if it was a string, it's going to force it to be a number regardless. And that's what we want. Okay. And then, okay, so here what he's doing is he's just reusing the same object, just deleting the old one. So this is how you delete properties in JavaScript. For JavaScript objects, this is how you use it. You just say delete and then the property. So data.name, gone. And then there we go. We return in this new JSON. So I'm assuming that this works because it looks like it'll work. So let's run this. Okay. And we get nothing. So new JSON has nothing here. So that's interesting. Would parse int accomplish the same thing? Yes. Yes, it would. The only thing is that if an age was like 14.5, it would pick, I think, 14. Because when you're going from like a possible decimal to an integer, it cuts away any of the decimals. It doesn't round. I forgot what that term's called. It basically just cuts it away. Okay. So for some reason, new JSON. Oh, I have to save. Haha, I didn't save. There we go. And here we go. And yeah, so you'll notice here that the age is now a number, and then the name is now split up into fname, lname. Okay. So does this solution work? Yeah. Yeah. It technically works. The only thing is I probably should have been, truncates it. The only thing I probably should have been more specific is I actually wanted you to actually create a new array. So although this works, I kind of wanted something like this. So let's modify this so it becomes more of the solution that we were looking for. So we can say something like let result, for example, equal to an empty array. So this will contain our data that is in the shape to be stored in our database. So in the world of like Mongoose, sometimes we call it databases or data stores, depending on, what kind of framework you're using, but, database, data store, whatever. And so what I wanted was something like this. So we're going to say, you can say something like let, new data equal to convert the old stuff, and then we can say result.push and then the new data. Okay, so we're accumulating it because we don't want to actually touch the original one. This one, we don't want to touch it. Okay, so we can actually just remove this part right here. we'll just remove this stuff. Well, let's remove this. We don't need to delete anything, right? We don't want to touch this. We want to return a new object. So we would return a new object like this. Then we can put, so we can say f name is full name at 0. That's going to be the first part. Remember, when you split a string, it creates an array. L name, and you'll know that if you read the API documentation that I put, you can actually read more about that. So we have f name, L name like that, and then we have age. So we can say age. That becomes number, data.age, and then occupation. That'll just become data.occupation. Okay. So the only thing we really need is just that. It's just splitting. And then we return that. So we have, this is the JSON, but now as an object. Okay. And then we're going to return this new object. We're going to put it into result. And then we can just display the result here. And if we run that, you get the same data, okay, but it's done slightly differently. So again, it all depends, right, on the requirements of your task. I wasn't very specific. I wasn't clear, okay, on that, but I just wanted to see what people would do, okay. And so this is totally the solution that Jimbo here, or Jimbo, put on here is totally correct. It does what the it does what the directions basically said. Write a program that takes the malformed JSON data and formats it for internal use. Okay, so we can say, yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. So good job, Jimbo. 10 out of 10, full marks. Okay. All right. Now, let's finally start doing some cool stuff. So let's talk about HTML. So I just want to preface this that what I'm going to go over is just the basics of HTML. This is not HTML in its entirety. This is just going to be the basics. And the reason why I'm just going to talk about the basics here is because when we go into React, okay, and we start learning about JSX, which is JavaScript with XML, we're going to be talking more about HTML. So I don't want to really talk about too much of HTML here because we're going to be hitting those things when we start doing the React stuff, okay? So when we do the React, you're going to be learning HTML, JavaScript, basically at the same time with the syntax of React, which is the JSX stuff, okay? So here I'm just going to, do a little bit, and then just so you get an idea, this way when you see it again, when we do React in like 2 weeks, it'll be more of a refresher than, the first time ever. Because if we just started with React, there'd be way too much for you to handle. It's like you have to learn JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and React all at the same time. That's like 4 things all at the same time. So I'm trying to spread things apart here. Okay. So again, this is just the basics. Okay, this is super basic stuff. It's just going to go over the syntax. So what it is, how we use it, and some examples. Okay. All right, so let's talk about what HTML stands for. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Okay. And we use this to create websites, and it's not a programming language. Okay, it's not really what it is. Just like XML is not a programming language. Okay. The HTML stuff is just a way, it's a language that describes the structure of your data. That's really it. It's kind of like XML, because that's kind of like what XML does. It just describes your data, the structure, the layout. But here we're doing it in such a way that it's specific for web pages. Okay, that's why if you see XML and HTML, you almost think that they're exactly the same. And you're right, there's a lot of similarities, but we use one over the other one for specific purposes. Okay. So again, this is supported by all major browsers. Okay. It's easy to learn. Okay, but just take some time to master. Okay. So again, HTML just describes a web page, and the way we talk about HTML is that it's made up of elements. I'm going to be saying that again. Oh, the HTML element this, the element this, the element that. Okay. So every time you hear the word element, just know it's just a part of HTML. Okay. It's the thing that makes up the entire thing. So elements just describe, how to render content, right? How do you render specific content? So elements may be nested, so you can have elements inside of other elements. That's totally possible. Each element has its own properties. Okay. So we can be a little bit more specific, right? So like a property could be like the height or the width of an element. You could specify that. Elements may be manipulated with JavaScript. See, this is where the power starts to come into play, how we can add some behavior to our websites. Like when we click a button, what does that do? Stuff like that. When we hover our mouse over things, what should happen? Maybe play an animation or change the colors. And elements may be manipulated with CSS. Yes, totally, 100%. We can change the color of our buttons, of our text. We can even organize, make rules to organize our code like into grids, flex containers, stuff like that. We can even animate things over time or based off specific pseudo actions like hovering, clicking, stuff like that. So what is an element? So an element looks kind of like this. It's made up of something called a tag. So you'll notice that in HTML we have a lot of this stuff. We have a tag that's called the opening tag, and then usually have some content, and then you have a closing tag. But not all elements have a closing tag. Okay, and we'll look at some of those. So again, it consists of something called a tag. So you're gonna here we'll replace tag with a specific element. And then content is placed between opening and closing tags. Some tags do not need a closing tag or may support not using one. So content may be static or dynamic. So using JavaScript, we can load and update content of an element. Okay, so we can have hello guest, and then once they log in, we change guest to your username or something like that. So here's an example of some HTML. Okay, this is super basic. Okay. And here we have comments. So this is how you do a comment. So comments a little strange with HTML. The way it works is you use these angle brackets, and then you have the first angle bracket must have the bang operator, the bang, which is the exclamation mark, and then 2 dashes, hyphen, hyphen, or the subtraction sign, whatever you want to call it. And then the ending one has to have also a minus minus. So and you can have anything in between. Okay. There is no syntax for multi-line. This also covers multi-line. So here's an example of a multi-line comment in HTML. Okay, as long as you have the syntax, it all gets commented out. Okay. So here we have this element here called the doc type. Okay, this tells what type of document this is. This is an HTML document. And you'll notice the first element, this tag, is an HTML tag. This is an HTML element. Okay. So you notice this has an opening and closing. We then have the body element. And then here's one called an H1. So it's just a header tag. So notice this header tags are in a single line. Okay, so you can do that. You can put it in a single line. You could also put your tags like this. So you have tag, content, and then tag, and you have it each on a separate line. Totally supported. You can do that if you want. Okay. And then here's an example of an element that doesn't require a closing tag. So you just say the tag, this element here is called a break, a line break. This is the tag BR, and you do slash and then the angle bracket. Okay, and that's it. So that's it. So that's all you need, right? If your tag doesn't require a closing tag, that's an example of one. So for HTML5, we have this doc type. So you say at the very beginning of your document, you must have this there. to indicate that this web page is HTML5 uh, an HTML5 web page. This is how you specify it. You just have to specify like that. Okay. Back in the day, you had to say something like doc type HTML in all caps equals, and then you would specify the website of the to actually specify how this web page is supposed to be interpreted, like HTML 4.1 or 4.0 or whatever. But now for HTML5, you just put that at the top and you're good to go. So HTML5 brings, of course, some new tags, right? That's why it's a 5. So there's new tags like headers, footers. It brought along this thing called a canvas, which allows us to do 2D rendering with JavaScript. So you can actually, if you wanted to, you can build an entire game with just with a canvas, right? You can write a game and a whole lot of other things. So let's talk about the head. So the head is going to contain metadata. Okay, so this is an HTML element that's in your HTML, and this is where you're gonna put all your metadata. So that includes data about your website. You can also use it to link JavaScript from outside. So if you're using something like jQuery or using Firebase and you're going to use the CDN, you can link it through here. You can also link your CSS. Okay, so if you have code that's in a different file, this is how you would link them together. It also contains the encoding type. What's the encoding type? By default, usually you just use UTF-8, but if you need to have special characters like Chinese characters, you use like ISO. I forget what it is for Chinese characters. It's like ISO something. It's like 086 or 10 something. And then we'll also have, in the head, you will also have a title element. And this actually gives you a title. So you'll notice that every time you're browsing, different websites and you have all these tabs, you'll notice that the tabs always have like a specific title. So how did they do that? Well, they use the title tag. Okay, so here's an example. We have our HTML element here, and then inside we have the head. So the head has an opening and closing tag, and these are the things that you would normally put inside of the head, right? So the title, this is a title. So this would be the title of the web page. So you'll see it on the tab. Styling, this is how you can do an embedded style. So we have our style tag here. We're saying, we'll talk about CSS later, but this is how you add some styles if you wanted to. Here's a script tag for your JavaScript, hello world. And then here's your body, so this will be your HTML stuff. And it just says h1 tag, hello world. Right, not bad. All right, so let's talk about metadata. So metadata is just data about data. That's why it's called meta. Okay. So we want to have some data about our data. So, for example, the data of our web page, how is it encoded? Well, you can specify that, right? UTF-8, that's usually what we use. But you can use something else if you're going to have special characters. Keywords for search engines, right? You want to have some metadata about your web page, so it's easier for the SEOs to be able to index, right, your web page. So when somebody Googles something, your web page pops up, right, as a higher ranking. You can also put a description for your page. This is good for like e-readers, right? And also Google will pick up your description and use that as part of the searching keywords and stuff. You can also put the author, who created that page, who is the author of that page. Again, screen readers will probably use this, and also Google is going to use this as well. Okay, so here's an example. So the tag is the meta tag, right? So we use the meta tag, and if we want to specify the encoding, we say char set, which is the character set. In this case, I'm explicitly stating it's going to be using the UTF-8. You say UTF-8. This is the encoding. Meta, here we have name equals keywords. So this is how you can add keywords. So use the name to specify what type of metadata are we talking about. So keywords, and then the content, and then you just separate out each word with a comma. So HTML, HTML5, learning, web development. Here's the metadata author, content, and then that's my name. metadata, meta name description. So it's going to be the description for the web page. Here's the content, learning about meta tags in HTML5. And then here's one called viewport. All right, so this is the data about how the viewport should be rendered by your browser. So you're giving kind of instructions. So the browser knows how to render your website. Okay, but I would urge you to follow what I said here. Google what this meta viewport tag does. So just Google meta viewport and then figure out what the heck does this stuff mean. Right? It's very interesting. Okay, so let's talk about SEO, search engine optimization. Uh, short for you can say SEO for that. So it's a title used by search engines for SERP. So SERP is the search engine results pages. So we have like meta descriptions, the headers. Google strips out the header content as snippets for better results in SERP. So I'll show you an example of that. The UL tags, these are the unordered lists. So a lot of times you'll have websites that have lists like top 10, whatever, and it has a list. Well, Google's going to use that when you say something about like, what's the best blah? And it's going to look, oh, is there any websites that have a list? Oh, there is. And it has to do with the person that is talking about or searching. This might be it. Let's put that at the top. So Google has, a very specific algorithm on how they do this, but all search engines do something very, very similar. Google has their secret recipe. Everybody else has their own recipes, okay? And the alt attribute and image tags may also be used. So we'll talk about what the alt tag does in images. So here's an example. I just typed into Google recipes for chicken. That's all I did. I just put recipes for chicken. And then, somebody had this unordered list. So you had one, we have, I'm not sure what this, easy dinners you can make tonight. So people also ask, what should I make for dinner? And you'll notice that these are some, recipes. There's chicken right there. These are some recipes, and this is in an unordered list. So it's not a surprise that it came up like this. Okay, none of this is surprising. This is all manufactured through Google's algorithms. Okay, but this is how it works. Okay. Okay, so we have certain display types that we might want to talk about as far as how HTML tends to render things. Okay. Now again, the HTML tags is just going to structure the content. Okay. But a lot of these elements have default attributes. They have default behaviors. Okay. Some might align the content to the left by default. Maybe it's in the center or to the right. Maybe it's all uppercase. Maybe it's bold. They all have default attributes. Okay. So it's good to know what these attributes are for these tags, at least the ones that are mostly used. Okay. So there are three ways that data or the content is displayed. Something called inline. Okay. So inline just means that the elements share the same line. Okay. However, height and width properties are ignored. Okay. So your text, span elements, links, EM tags, strong I, and small tags, these are all going to be in line. What we mean by in line is they come one right after the other. Okay. And I'm going to show you some examples of this. And then we have something called a block tag or block display. So the block display is an element that starts on a new line, okay, and expands the entire width of its parent container. So for example, divs, divs, all the header tags 1 through 6, the p tags for paragraphs, li for list item, and the section. They're all going to try and span the entire width of the document. Okay, but they're constrained by their parents. Okay, so if you're at the root of the body, then you basically have the entire screen for yourself, right? And then we have something called inline block, which displays an element on the same line like inline, but you can set height properties. So if you want a button to be right next to your sentence, like right in the middle of your sentence, but you want to also be able to change the height or the width of this button with in the middle of your text, then you use something called inline block. So that'll cause it to be on the same line, but you can also change the width and the height. Okay, so examples of these is like images and buttons. Okay, and I have something to read about here of how images and buttons are actually rendered. So you can come back to these slides and read this specific part. Okay. Cool. So then here I wrote some code here, and I believe, yes. Okay, so I do have it. Okay. So here's some HTML. Again, we have our head, and we have some meta information, and we have our title. So here's an element, the p tag. This is the paragraph. Okay, the paragraph is a block type, meaning that the way the content here is going to be displayed is that you can imagine that the p tag is just a container, and it's just going to try and extend the entire width possible. Whatever width its parent has, it will take up the whole thing. So nothing can ever be next to a p tag, right? It's going to be the paragraph, and that's it. You can't have something right next to it. You can, but you have to go out of your way to make that happen with CSS. But by default, the p tag wants to take the entire width. Nobody can be a tangent to it. Okay, right next to it. So here's some text. Here is some text. So all this stuff here is in line, meaning they're all on the same line. So the a tag, which is for links, okay. So this is a link, okay. It's going to be in line with this text. That's why it's called inline. So this is an inline display because it's going to be in line with your text. So again, here's another paragraph, and these paragraphs will not be next to each other. They're going to stack on top like pancakes, okay? Because this p tag is going to expand the whole width, and the p tag always wants to be on a new line. So that's the way these work. So these are always going to be on their own lines, and they're going to take up the entire width. So here's an example of the strong tag, which basically creates an emphasis on a word, also makes it bold. So this is really good for screen readers, especially the adaptive ones that have some kind of artificial intelligent voice, that as it's reading, it can say like, here is even more text, right? It emphasizes the even. So by you putting strong like that, screen readers will emphasize specific words, like if they're italic or strong, stuff like that. And again, so this last paragraph text is, again, me showing inline, almost like it looks inline, except I have a div right in the middle of this sentence. Now a div is a what? It's a block display type. And blocks always want to be on their own line, and they want to take up the entire width. So what's going to happen to this text? Right? That's the question. What's going to happen to this text? So this text, which says some more text, will be forced to do something. And the result is here. So here's a link. Links are in line, meaning they're always going to be in line with whatever content you have, wherever you put it at. Here we have a button. You'll notice that the word even that had the bold, the strong tag, made it bold. It emphasized it. You see how it's bolder, it's darker, has a thicker stroke than the content around it. And then here is a button, right? We have a button. Where did the button happen? Click. Oh, I might have removed it. Okay, but here's a button. It's also in line, except that you'll notice that the button here is bigger than this text. Okay, and then here we have some text, and I wrote out the code or the HTML stuff. I wrote it out as inline, as being one line, except that the div is a block type. So we'll have this block text. It forces it to be in its own line, and its width expands all the way over here. Okay, it's invisible, you can't see it, which is why the some more text is forced to go underneath it. Okay? It cuts down because this block text takes up this entire width. Okay. So here's an example of an image tag. Okay, an image requires a source, that's the attribute, and then you can put any URL that will return an image. And here I can specify a height. So I have style here. I specified the height to be 100 pixels, vertical line baseline. And then here I have a button, also 100 pixels, and I just had the text here, click me, some more text next to it, and then I have a link here. And then isn't it interesting how the button reacts to a height change? So again, although these are both inline, they act a little differently. Their default behaviors act a little differently. Here we go. So here's the image. The image is going to be aligned at the base. Okay, that's its default behavior. It's always going to be at the base. The button is center aligned. It's going to be aligned here. So when I say have the height grow, it's going to grow like this. If I say baseline, then the button will grow from here up instead of going from the middle out. So buttons grow from middle out if it's center aligned. Images will grow from the bottom up, because they're by default they're baseline. In the last example, where was the button declared? Oh yeah, I think I had changed this. I changed this I changed this code. I think because I didn't want to have too many elements. That's why there's no button code here. At least here, there's no button code. But yeah, that's the only reason why. I should probably update this image. There should be no button there. But here's the button right there. Again, it's really hard to see here because I had to like paste the text in here and then format it so it can fit. But it's a lot more quote unquote legible when you have it on the VS Code. And so then we have a situation like this, okay? And you'll notice that these are all in line, right? They're all in line with this. You can see here this content, they're all in line. That's why we call it inline. So even though the image and the button are both in line, the image has a baseline alignment. It starts at the base. The button is center aligned. It has middle aligned here, which is why it grows from the middle out. So you have to be careful, you have to be conscious of these things. Okay. What's the time here? Okay, cool. All right. So we'll talk about the article tag here. So the article tag is new. This is in HTML5. Okay, and it represents a self-contained composition in a document, page, application, or site. It's a piece of content that can stand on its own regardless of the page it's put in. So that means that whatever's inside of this article tag, if I were to take it out of this website and stick it somewhere else, okay, in a completely different context, it can stand on its own. Okay, at least that's the idea. Okay, so you can use it to contain content that could be moved to another location and still make sense. So for example, product details, right? Like for an ad, a post, a magazine or newspaper article, right? You can stick that anywhere and you can kind of tell, oh yeah, this is like a magazine or newspaper article. A blog entry or a tweet. You've seen websites where there's a tweet embedded in the website. And when you look at that, you don't actually think, what the heck is this? I have no idea what this is. It's all self-contained, right? You know, oh, this is a tweet. So you know the context of that thing. You're not like, caught off guard, like, yo, this doesn't make any sense. And articles may contain headers. You can put a header or H1. So you can totally do that. So here's an example. So this is a demo from Mozilla. So you can see here's some HTML. So we have the article tag. You can ignore the classes. This is just for like CSS stuff. You can just ignore that. But notice that we have a H1 here. This is the title for this article. Now, when I say article, I hope you guys don't think like an article from a newspaper, right? I'm thinking about, we're talking about article as in the definition of what an article is. It's just like a thing, right? It's just a thing. So this thing or article, right, it's just has a, we put a header here. So notice that the first thing here, the first child here is a H1, and it just has a title, weather forecast for Seattle. Okay, cool. And then this article has an article embedded inside of it. This article, the content of this and the context is a day forecast, right? This has its own title, which happens to be a date. And then the text here, the paragraph, is just, you know, rain, which is the description of that day's forecast. So if you were on, say, the New York Times, right? If you're on the New York Times, for example, and you saw this on the sidebar, and if you looked over, would you be confused as to why it was there? Possibly. But if you look at this, it has all the information you need, right? To tell you what the heck this thing is. This little widget that we created, this article thing, right? This forecast, everything is self-contained, right? If I were to remove this title, which is why it's kind of optional, if I were to remove this title, just looking at the content here, how it's been created, couldn't you just automatically tell, or couldn't you figure out what this was? You'd be like, yo, this looks like a forecast because of the images and the text here. That looks like a forecast. And then based on how this looks, if I were to just take this part out and stick it somewhere else in a random website, okay, random location, you could tell that this was the forecast for a particular day, specifically this day, March 3rd, 2018. So you can see how it's all self-contained, no matter if we're looking at it as the entire thing put together, or if we look at just one part, okay, you can tell what that thing is, right? You can kind of tell, oh, this is the forecast for this specific day, and it looks like it's going to rain. Look, we have an icon that's saying it's going to rain, right? We're talking about Seattle, Washington, right? You know, big surprise. Now we have another tag called a section. So this represents a standalone section contained within an HTML document, and we use it to group thematically similar content. So thematically as in the same theme. Okay, so if we're talking about shoes, you can put things in your section that's all about shoes. Okay. So the section could be categories, for example. So like we talk about electronics, food, or books. Sections usually contain an H tag, again, a header tag, just like we saw with the article where it said forecast for Seattle. But again, you don't really have to, but you could. Probably you should. A section is usually part of an entire page. Unlike an article, if you remove it and place it somewhere else, it loses its context and may not make sense. For example, let's look at this. So here we start off with a H1, how to fish. Okay, cool, how to fish. Now, this is going to be an entire article, and each section, you can think of it as a paragraph. Okay, and each paragraph is going to have a heading. Okay, so here we're using H2, introduction. People have been catching fish for food since before recorded history. Talk about equipment. The first thing you'll need is a fishing rod or pole, blah, 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 blah. Okay, cool. So when you look at it as a whole, okay, how to fish, this part right here, all this information, you see this on a website, it's okay, but we're getting in fuzzy territory. Now, if I saw this and I was on Bass Pro Shop and I was in the fishing section and I saw this, 100% makes sense. I'm in a fishing website, you know, like fishing and hunting website, Bass Pro Shop, and I'm on the fishing section and I see this, I am not confused. I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. Now, how to fish. I go to a vegan website, right? I go to a vegan website and then I see this, how to fish. First, I'm going to be very confused. I'm like, okay, this is confusing, right? Because the context, I just lost the context, right? Because I'm on a vegan website, not supposed to hurt any animals with eyes or whatever. And then here I have this article that says fishing. I was like, okay. Let's say that wasn't even the case. Let's say you go to Amazon, like a shopping website, and then this pops up. Okay, now you're really confused because you're on a shopping website, but you have this thing that has a special theme. The theme is how to fish, right? And you're on a website, a shopping website like Amazon or eBay, and you see this. Now you're really confused. See, the theme is broken. You can't really just stick this anywhere you want. And then on top of that, if I were to take this particular section, which is just this paragraph, and I stick this on a different website, now it's really confusing, right? Imagine you go on Twitter and on the side it says introduction. People have been catching fish for food since before. You'd be like, what the heck? Right? You have no context. Like it's all broken, right? And then if I were to lose the heading and just have the section with no title, and it just says people have been catching fish for, right? It's getting more and more confusing. You're losing more and more context. It doesn't make sense. It's more appropriate if this was on a website that had to do with, possibly hunting or sports fishing, something like that. It would make more sense. So you can see that when you're using sections, it's always about creating like a thematic, cohesive narrative here, right? All the content here has to be cohesive. You can't rip parts out. In article, you totally can, but with sections, you can't, right? You start to lose context and it starts to not make sense. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Again, if you guys have any questions, put it in the chat. Okay, and so now we talk about HTML element attributes. So attributes are just characteristics of an HTML element. Okay. Each HTML element has its own set of attributes, but many have overlapping attributes. This is true. For example, almost all elements have some kind of height or width attribute, right? And the ones that don't, like, get ignored, you can force them to have them by making them block or inline block, right? That's one of the strategies we do when we're using CSS. We want to change the height or width of something, but it's an inline type, so it ignores this. So we switch it to inline block, and then we can, right? So do a little hacking there. So attributes help define how the element is treated or behaves. So that's like rendering or input validation. Okay. So again, like you can change the height, the width, maybe. That's how you're telling the HTML, displayer or parser, whatever you want to call it, how to render that particular piece of content, changing the width and the height. We can also change the behavior, right? And we're going to see lots of examples with input. Okay. So for example, here's an example of the image tag has an attribute called source, src for short. We set that equal to, some URL that has an image. And then there's another attribute called the alternative, or the alternative whatever. And this is always going to be a string, okay? It's going to be a string, a bright yellow banana. The idea here is I want to display an image of a banana. At least that's the goal. Okay. Now this alt attribute has a specific function. If for some reason this source, okay, the link that I provided here is broken, somebody deleted the image, or it was moved, or the name changed, something happened, I don't know, and we cannot actually grab the image, then the fallback is we will display in its place this text, the text that follows here. So here's an example. If you look at the link here, this is a fake link. It says http domain.com/banana.png. This doesn't exist. So you'll notice that the image here is broken. It's broken. The URL that we fed to the source attribute is invalid. So the alt text is displayed in place of the image. There you go. Okay. Depending on the browser, will depend on the icon and behaviors, but usually this is what happens, okay? Cool. So now here I put a valid link using Unsplash. Put a valid link of a banana. I changed the alt text to make more sense because this is a bright yellow banana with a white backdrop. The background of this image is white. And then here, look at that. I have some attributes, height and width. And I'm specifying I want the height to be 100 pixels and the width to be 100 pixels, effectively making this a square. And there we go. We have our banana. And then here's a, a little link here if you want to, be brave and click on that, by all means. Cool, and so we have this other attribute called style. Now this attribute is very interesting. So this is how you do inline styling. Okay, this is available for all HTML elements and allows you to access all the styles. So this allows you to do CSS in your HTML element directly. You can do some CSS. So there are some good reasons why you'd want to do something like this. Okay. And this is like, if you don't need, like, I don't need a CSS file, that's too complicated. No, I don't want to do that. I'm only going to do, like, my website's super basic. I just want to change the color here and that, call it a day. Fine. Well, then you can use the styling here. No need for complex CSS. Or you have some CSS that you inherited, like you have a CSS file that defines, how text and buttons are going to look. Let's say like materialize or something like that defines a bunch of colors for your text and blah, 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 blah. But then like for this particular element, you want to change the color from like, black to like, like a dark gray or like a dark blue-ish. So it's like not black, but it's not gray either, like super dark. So it's like somewhere in between. It's like an almost black, so you can change that. So you can override these colors or even the properties like height, width, okay? We can also use this for CSS utility functions, right? So we can do that too. So we'll show some examples of using things like calc, transform, translate right in your HTML. So this is a pretty intense example here. So let me go ahead and grab this code. I will grab this. Also, you'll notice that in all of the slides here that have any code, it's not a screenshot. You can go in and you can grab all of it, copy it, and you can try it on your own. So now we're going to write some code here. So I have, I don't want to delete this because we're going to talk about this. So I'm going to comment this out. Okay. Oh, it's not liking that. Let's do this. Yeah, I don't think here you can have comments inside of comments. Okay. So I'm gonna change this name to index1, whatever. Create a new file here, call it index.html. Now I'm just paste. Hit save. Now how do I run this? That's the next question. How do I run my HTML page? Well, if you're using VS Code, you're in luck. Okay, you can click here on the extensions on VS Code. This is the little toolbar here we have. You go here, it has a little blocks, extensions. Okay, expose it, there you go. You can type in here, live server. Okay, live server. Okay, this, you want to go with this one. Okay, the one by Ritwick Day. The one that has 12 million installs. This is the one you want. Okay, you install it. Once you install it, any HTML file you have, you can right click and say open with live server. So let's click on that. Effectively, it creates a server on your computer. So you'll notice that this is not a regular document. This is an actual URL, localhost at port 5500. We're serving index. Cool. So Yep, yep, it is very good for texting. Not texting, but testing. Um, so here I am using the style tag on this last one here, and I'm doing something very, very particular. So notice here that here I just changed the height and the width. Here's 100. And then on the height here, for this second image, I'm using some CSS functions, max. So I can feed it multiple values, but here I'm just feeding it 2. So what's the max of 50 and 100 pixels? Well, I think that's 100, right? So the height will become 100. The width, max between 50 pixels and 100 pixels, it'll be 100. Okay. So we go. Okay. And then for the image here, this style, we have a height of the max of between 50 and 100. And then we have the width. And you'll notice I'm defining multiple of these attributes right inside here. Okay, so I'm going to make this bigger here. Okay, just like that. Okay. And here I have some padding. Okay, I have some padding. And the background color here is black. So we go here, that's what we have. Okay. You see here, we'll see the example here. The fruits of our labor. Puns intended. Okay. Now here, here's some code, some more code. Oh. Now here I have a style tag defined at the top saying, again, we're going to go over CSS, but here I have this image tag and I'm saying all images must have a background color of red. They must also have a height of 100 pixels and they must also have a padding of 10 pixels. Okay. So notice that this image here now doesn't define a height at all. Okay, but it's grabbing it by default. Okay, you see there? It's grabbing the height and the padding from this CSS. Now this image should also do what this CSS styling is saying. However, I'm going to use a style tag and I'm going to override those properties. So I don't want to have a height of 100 pixels. I want to have a height of 50 pixels. And on top of that, I want to add some extra stuff. For example, I want to have a border radius of this extremely large number. This causes the radius around your element to actually become circular. This is how you can make circles. And then I want to change the background color to black. Okay, so we see here, there you go. This is 100 by 100 with 10 pixels worth of padding. That's why we can see the background. That's why you can see this image is white. It's not white because of this background. In fact, if I have a dark reader and I turn this on, the image doesn't turn black because this white background is part of the image. Okay, and then here I did the same thing, except here I wanted 50 pixels for the height and the width. And then for the border radius, I made it like 99999 pixels, causing it to become basically a circle. So there you go. Boom. Simple enough. Okay. And that's pretty dope, right? We have this image is being styled by my default CSS that I defined somewhere else. And then this one's overriding those properties. Okay. And here's my little pun. Isn't this just bananas? Okay. Puns are getting bad. Hang on tight. All right, here we go. All right. Now for some cool stuff. JavaScript with HTML. Now this is going to be fun. So we can use JavaScript to manipulate properties of an HTML element. This is what adds some extra action stuff. Okay, some behaviors. In the context of HTML, we call them attributes. In the context of JavaScript, we call them properties. because because in JavaScript, these properties become JSON objects. The HTML elements, when we grab them, they're actually going to be served to us as JSON objects, which is why they're called properties, not attributes. Okay, so when we grab them from the DOM, the document is going to give us JSON JavaScript objects, and so we can manipulate them like that. Okay, so here's some code that's split up into a couple parts. You're going to copy this. We're going to grab this, paste it here. That's part 1. And then here we have part 2, which is the rest. So grab this and then paste it right there. Okay, that's our entire thing. Save that. Okay. And now we have these 2 bananas. And then we can hover over and then, oh, what's going on, guys? Look. Right? Magic. Magic. Right? Let me zoom in in case you can't see it. Look at that. Isn't that cool? Right? How much money can we make off this website? Right? All the monies. All the monies. Okay? So from left to right, we have normal state. Hovering over the first images causes this, and hovering the second image causes that. Pretty basic behavior. But let's look at the code. Let's look at the code. So here we have our images. Here's our other image. And then here we have a JavaScript. We have some JavaScript. So look at this. So document dot get elements by tag name. Now notice it says elements, plural, by tag name. Specify the tag. Image. I want all the image tags, img. This returns what? A collection of HTML image element. So a collection. This returns back an array. If we hover over this, is a collection. This is why we need to know about for loops. That's why we went through this whole process, right? I didn't do that just to hear myself speak. I did this because we're going to be using this a lot. So this gives us an array of images, of these images as JavaScript objects. We can now manipulate them. So here I have a for loop. I'm looping through. I don't know how many I have, right? Well, I know here, but in the JavaScript world, I don't know how many we have. We're going to say for every element starting at index 0, as long as I is less than the amount of images we have, we will continue incrementing by 1. The first thing we want to do is we want to create a intermediate variable image to capture it. So images at index I. Okay, we'll have our image. And then to have the behavior, we can add things called event listeners. So I can say add event listener, mouse over. I'm using my mouse. And then here I pass a function to subscribe. Okay. So this function here will get executed whenever I hover my mouse over the image. Then when that happens, I'm going to say this function always gets a mouse event, call it EV for event. And if I say event.target, this tells me which element I grabbed. And then I can grab the style. So the target in this case would be the image, but if I say ev.target, I will get the image as well. I can say .style. This gives me the style object. And then again, I can use bracket notation. And here I can say background-color because this is the property name. Okay. Well, you don't see it here, but in the previous example, this is what it's called, background color. I change this to black. So when we mouse over it, we're going to change the background color to black. And then we want to listen for another event, mouse leave. When you leave the image, okay, we want to execute this function. What do we want to do? Well, we want to grab the target, which is the HTML element. Let's grab the style. Okay, cool. Now that we have the style, again, the reason why we have to use bracket notation was because in the earlier slides for JavaScript, I told you that the hyphen is an illegal identifier. We cannot use it, so we cannot use dot notation. Okay? So we cannot use dot notation. So we must use it as a string because there's an illegal character here. That's why we have to do it this way. And then I just set this to be transparent. And what's the effect? Well, when I enter the image, now I'll change this to be dark. This is the image. And let me zoom in here. When I enter the image range, okay, the image tag range, the background becomes black. Now the reason why you're like, but the image is way over here. Yeah, that's because this has a padding. So the padding forces the content to squish in by 10 pixels. So the border of this image is actually the entire thing, what you see right here. But I put 10 pixels worth of padding that causes the content inside to get squished. That's why I only have to have my mouse over here, because this is where the container, the image container actually starts. So as soon as my mouse enters that first pixel, boom, mouse over event gets executed. And then my function gets called, which is me changing the background color to black. Then when I leave, that event gets raised, then my function gets executed, and I change the background color back to transparent. Same thing for this one, okay? Except this one is circular, not rectangular. Okay, because if it was rectangular, when I have my mouse right over here, it should have turned on, but it doesn't. Because this one is circular. Isn't that cool? Can you already start thinking of some things that you could do with this? Right? We just did some hover stuff, so that was impressive, right? That impressed me. So can you imagine what else we could do, right? All right. Time is at 7:23. Okay. Got 7 more minutes. We're going to finish these slides, and on Wednesday there will be no slides. On Wednesday we're just going to be coding a bunch of stuff, bunch of HTML stuff, bunch of code. That's why I'm kind of like rushing through these slides. All right, now the last one I want to talk about here is the input. So the input is an interactive control. So this allows you to get feedback from the user, mostly input, right? This is used mostly for forms, right? But, you know, use it for whatever. And there's a plethora of combinations between the type attribute and the actual attributes. So when we say input, I mean there are different inputs, types. There's one tag, input, but that one input tag can become many different types. Okay. So here, that's what I have this for. So I'm gonna just delete this, don't need this anymore. And then I have this one. I will rename this to index. Okay. Refresh this. Turn the dark reader off. Cool. So here I have various inputs. Okay. So let's look at the code here first. Okay. Can I go to Zen mode? Yeah, a little bit. Cool. So here I have a paragraph tag that just says input type. Okay. And then here, look at my input. I have my tag here called input. Let me zoom in a little bit. Close that. Okay. So I have the input tag. Okay. You'll notice that the input does not have a closing tag. That's why you just do / and an angle bracket. It has an attribute called type, and it has many types. Here's an example of an input as a button, and then the value is going to be what actually gets displayed. Okay, so value, click me. And it says click me, and look, I can interact with it. I can click it, it's a button. Very cool, right? Now here's an example of a radio group. So radio group, that's what we call them. Okay. And the radio group is just these. You ever seen these before? Has anybody ever seen this before? Right? Where you click on something and it becomes highlighted. You click on the other one. Only one can be highlighted at a time. Right? This is called a radio group. Okay, you can either click on these buttons or you can click on the labels. Okay, they're linked. We link them, okay, like this. They don't have to be next to each other. Don't be confused about that. They don't have to be next to each other. So the way this works is we say type radio. We give it a value. So this value should be unique, okay? This value is what actually gets sent. Like if we had a button that says submit and it was inside of a form, this is what actually gets sent to your server, okay? So this label here has literally nothing to do with this. You can call this bananas. But the value here is what's really important. This is what will actually get sent up to your server. The ID is important if you want to have a label that is associated with your input radio button. So I specify an ID radio. It has to be unique, radio-1. And I say for my label, the way I link them is I say for who? For radio 1. Okay, in the HTML browser, the browser is able to smartly link them because of the IDs. That's why they have to be unique. Okay, and then a name. So in order for these radio inputs to be grouped together, they must have the same name. So name radio group 1, name radio group 1. These are part of the same group. Okay. So that's how we're able to group these radio buttons, is like this. You just follow these rules, and this is how you can have a group of radio buttons. And in the labels, again, totally optional, but highly recommend it in order for us to know what the heck you're talking about, value 1, value 2, and this is how you group them up. Okay. And here's an example of a radio group, again, but with a default value. So if I refresh this, you'll notice that this group has no value until I actually click on it. Then one of them becomes quote unquote checked. But this one already has one that's checked by default. So let's look at the code of how that looks. So these two are basically the same, except I've had to change the radio group. Okay. And the IDs have to be unique. Okay, so I call this one radio 3, radio 4. Okay, type of radio, value. They can have, values don't have to be unique. Okay. Just the IDs and the groups, should share the same ones if they're going to be in the same group. Now, the only difference is that this first radio button will be checked by default by having this attribute called checked. And that's it. Right? And then this one becomes checked. If you wanted the second one to be checked by default, let's remove this. And let's put it here. Save. Now the second value is checked. Right? It's very easy to add more. So if I wanted to add another one, let's add a BR for a line break because these are in line. So that means if I didn't have this break, for example, if I commented this out and I commented this out, you'll notice that these radio buttons go from left to right. They're in line. Okay? They are in line. So if I want them to be vertical like this, one way I can do that is just by having a line break that forces them to be vertically aligned like that. So if I want to add another one, I can say input type. And notice that if you're using VS Code, look at all the types there are. Many types. We'll look at radio, value. Let's say this is the third one. So value 3. Again, this is all going to depend on how you want your server to interpret this data and what the data is supposed to be. And then this one will be radio-4. It has to be unique to the entire document, not just the group, but the entire document. Name, I want it to be part of radio group 2. Okay, if I save that and I go back here, you'll notice that I have a button now, but I have no label. I have no idea what value that is, right? This is hard to read. That's why we have a label. So in order to create a label that's associated with it, we say label. You say for, and you specify the ID of the input. In this case, I want it to be associated to radio 4. So I say radio 4. Okay. And then I put inside my label has opening and closing brackets, or opening and closing tags. And in the middle has the content, in this case, the text for my label. So let's say value 3. Oh, now it makes more sense, right? Look at that. Oh, for radio. Oh, look at that. These are both 4s. Look what's happening here. If I click on 1, I click on 3, it selects this one because I made a mistake. This is why they need to be unique. This has to be 5, and this has to be 5. There we go. Ah, there we go. Now it's working. See? And if I wanted the value 3 to be the default one, I just remove this check. I put it right here. So now, oops. Now this one is checked. So I go back, value 3 is checked instead. Right? It's very simple. Like I said, HTML is very easy to learn. It's just very hard to master because there's just so much stuff here. Okay? So don't be overwhelmed. Okay? So that's radios, buttons. Pretty simple, right? Now let's move over here. Here's some more code. This is the text. So input type text. You can have some placeholder. You can even have a default value. I put delete this text, and it pops up here. And if I were to just delete this text, I have my placeholder. This is my placeholder text. So you can imagine that you can have something like this. Maybe you have a text here that maybe says enter email, right? You've seen this before, and look, kind of like every time you go register for like social media site or whatever, it says enter email. You can type in your whatever, right? Type in blah 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 at me.com. There you go. Done. Okay, so let's do another one. So what about if you wanted to have type, oops, type, and then text, you have placeholder, and it says enter password. There's your enter password, but it's like, oh no, but you can actually see the password. So how do we change that? You can put, now I have to remember how this goes. Actually, I think from the text, I think it's the text type. Oops. I think it's the text type. Password. Yeah, change the type to password. We switch back. It says enter password. Acts just like a text box. So here I can put like, bob@gmail.com. Enter your password. Oh, look, the little dots. And I can click on the little I, and it shows me my password, and go like that. Are you starting to see what you can do now? Are you seeing it? Is it starting to cook in your head? Are you realizing all the stuff we can do now? It's very cool, huh? All right, so right before we leave, we have a checkbox. So you've seen this before, a little checkbox, right? And just like the radio buttons, if you wanted the checkbox to be checked by default, you just put checked. Save it, and you'll notice that my password thing, it tried to be like, oh, did you want to save your password? Look, it's even smart enough to pick this up. You don't have to write extra code. The browsers are smart enough to pick it up. Isn't that cool? Isn't this cool? We don't have to do much. A lot of the stuff gets taken care of for us. See, look, it says enter email, enter password. It picked it up. Would you like to save this? It's like, nah, right? That's not real. I'm having trouble getting live server to work. I don't get the option when I right click the HTML and explore. Not sure what's wrong. Okay, so just make sure you have the extension live server by Ritwick Day. And then once you have it, make sure you enable it. Once you install it, it's not enabled by default. You have to click here, enable. So make sure it's enabled, okay? So the way you know it's enabled is if you have the option to disable, right? Because the opposite of enable is disable. And if that's the case, then kill your VS process, kill it, and just restart it. I think you can do that from here. File, is there a way to restart? No, I guess just say exit, just turn it on again. And then it should work just fine. Now at that point, you can right click any HTML file and just say open with live server. And then when you're ready to kill it, you can either kill your VS Code, Or you can go right here where it says port. You click on that and it says disposing. So now if I go here and I refresh, you can see it's thinking and it says can't reach this page. So you just turn it all back on by going, hey, go live. There you go. And it picked up my HTML my index page by default. Let me know if that works for you, Jim Bob. Jimbo. Jimbo. Okay. And then, okay, cool. So just again, if you have a checkbox, this is the type checkbox. It says checked. Or checkbox. If you want to have a default to be checked, you can use that. Try those and it didn't work. Okay, if you want after the session, hop on to the Discord and we can do a live chat and you can show me your screen. Okay. And then here we have a date picker. You can see here's the date. You can pick, it has a default date. You can pick a date, right? There you go. It's a date, right? Right here. You just say input type date. And a lot of these things are, again, a lot of these things are done for you. It's very, very cool. And then last but not least, we have the file. Choose file. How many of you guys use Canvas? How many of you guys have ever seen the choose file option? Well, there you go. Choose file. Boom. You can choose a file. Whatever file you want. Let's say I pick my resume. Open. Boom. Now it's there in queue. Now, if this was a form and I hit submit, it would send it to my server as something called, actually, I forgot what it's called. It's like X. It's a specific format it sends it in. It's X something. In Postman, we can do this in Postman. We say the body. There it is. x-www-form-url encoded or form data, but it's usually going to send it as this x-www whatever. That's why I don't memorize it. It's too long. Okay. Cool. And if you were to hit submit, that file will get sent to your server, and yeah, but done. You don't have to handle any of that stuff. As long as you follow the tags, a lot of the stuff gets done for you. You could do it yourself, but I don't recommend it. Just follow the forms, and we'll go over forms later. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys today. Hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully you guys learned something, and I really hope that this stuff right here that we looked at, this input stuff, although very small in scope, you can start to see how websites use this stuff, and now you can too. That's the point. Now you can too. Okay, so what I would recommend as an exercise is play around. Again, I should probably post the code here. That's what I was trying to do. Play around. Okay, if you're using VS Code, a lot of this stuff will pop up for you. So if I say input and then type equals, and then boom, look at all the different things. Look, there's a color one. Let's check out the color. So what is the color? What does that look like? Go back here, go to my server. Oh, look, color. Boom, color wheel. Nice. RGB, switch this to HSL. Hex. Wow. Look at that. Much wow. Look, even has a little dot thingy. Ooh. Right? So, you know, plenty of things we can do. Oh, it's crashing. And I crashed. I crashed my restart. Okay. For some reason it crashed it. Whatever. But anyways, it's a good place to end anyway. All right. I'm over time. Thank you for coming, and I will see you guys on Wednesday, and we're going to do some more HTML stuff. All right. If you guys have any questions, hit me up on the Discord. Jim Bob, if you're still having problems, I'll be on the Discord voice chat, and then you can share me your screen. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody. See you guys Wednesday. Bye.